Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. After dedicating so much time to talking about bad sci fi and fantasy movies, I thought it would be a good change of pace to talk about some movies that most critics didn't like, but I actually do like. For this list, I will be pulling from RottenTomatoes.com. And if you aren't familiar with their system, basically they are a review aggregator that calculates the percentage of audience members and critics who gave a film a positive review. If a movie's score is above 60%, it is labeled fresh, but if the score falls below 60%, it is considered rotten. On my list, these movies are ranked not necessarily in order of quality, but in order from the highest rated by critics to the lowest rated by critics. I wanted to make this video to highlight some films that I think are very underappreciated, and I hope this video gives you some good movie recommendations if you haven't seen any of these before. So, with all that being said, here are my top 10 favorite rotten sci fi and fantasy movies. Coming in at number 10 with a 57% critic score is going to be I, Robot from 2004. One of the reasons that this movie is regarded very poorly by a lot of people is that it is not accurate to the Isaac Asimov book it is named after. This is because the original script for the movie was called Hardwired and was originally written to be a fully new sci fi detective story. But then, 20th Century Fox got the rights to iRobot and insisted the movie's title be changed and the script reworked in order to increase marketability. And apart from a few character names and the use of the three laws of robotics, there is very little that connects this movie to the original source material. However, while this movie fails as an adaptation of Asimov's books, I think it still works pretty well as a sci fi movie in its own right. The mystery is compelling and does a good job of keeping the audience guessing. It has some pretty memorable lines and action sequences that I've remembered all these years later since when I first saw this movie as a kid.
Can a robot write a symphony? Can a robot turn a canvas into a beautiful masterpiece? Can you?
Will Smith is a good charismatic lead, and Alan Tudyk gives what I consider to be one of the most underrated performances of his career. It also wouldn't be the last time he would play a sassy robot.
I am taking them to imprison them in prison.
And while it may not be accurate to the source material, the movie's ideas and themes do feel very much in the spirit of Asimov's work. With AI becoming more and more advanced in our reality, the themes and ideas presented in this movie have become much more relevant now than they were in the past, and in some ways that is a little scary. Unfortunately, the biggest problem with this movie is its visuals. While Sunny's facial animations still hold up pretty well, this movie suffers from the overuse of green screen curse that plagued a lot of early 2000s movies. And it's also very clear that some of the action scenes are trying way too hard to mimic the style of The Matrix. But even though a lot of the visuals haven't held up and it isn't accurate to the source material, I would still say that iRobot is a fun sci fi detective story with good character arcs and themes. So, whether you are a hardcore sci fi fan or just a general movie fan, I think that iRobot is well worth a watch.
You're a shrink, huh? My ex-wife would sure be glad I'm talking to you. You don't know her, do you?
Coming in at number 9 with a 56% critic score is going to be Man of Steel from 2013. This movie was incredibly divisive when it initially came out, largely because it is the tonal opposite of the Richard Donner Superman movies with Christopher Reeve. Those movies went for a mostly lighthearted tone that focused more on Superman's relationship with Lois Lane. Whereas with Man of Steel, Zack Snyder and David S. Goyer set out to make a movie that was grittier in its tone and more epic in its scope. And given the landscape of superhero media at the time it was made, I think this was a smart direction to take the character. Superman Returns already tried to replicate the Richard Donner formula, and the result was a movie that is mostly pretty forgettable. But with Man of Steel, so many of the scenes and lines leave a lasting impression, and a lot of this is due to the incredible visuals and cinematography that still hold up over a decade later. I know I've complained a lot about Zack Snyder on this channel, but here I think his great eye for visual storytelling really shines through and creates some truly memorable moments. This is also aided by Hans Zimmer's score, which, frankly, I think is one of the best soundtracks for any superhero movie ever made. Each track perfectly complements the scene it is paired with, be it quiet and reflective, or loud and bombastic. And I know it's basically become a meme at this point to fan cast Henry Cavill in everything,
Bruh.
but I do think he is good as Superman. He does a good job of portraying a character that is incredibly strong, but still has empathy towards those he cares about. By contrast, General Zod, as played by Michael Shannon, brings a great fanatic energy to contrast with Superman's more stoic personality. He steals every single scene that he is in with the sheer intensity of his performance.
You believe your son is safe? I will find him. I will reclaim what you have taken from us.
And while the action may go a bit too over the top at times, it is still engaging and fun to watch. The visuals and sound effects do a great job of conveying the speed and power of the Kryptonians as they clash with one another. However, as has been stated many times by numerous critics, this movie is not without its flaws. There's egregious product placement. I think the third act goes on a bit too long, and this scene will never make sense to me. I may go into more depth on this movie in a future video because there is just so much to unpack here. But in spite of its flaws, Man of Steel is still a movie that I enjoy for its great visuals, action, and score.
Right about now, we could all use a pancake or two. Or 10. Pancakes with omelets, burgers, burritos.
Coming in at number 8 with a 53% critic score is Willow from 1988. This movie was meant to be George Lucas's fantasy epic blockbuster to follow up the record-shattering success of the original Star Wars trilogy. And while this movie did make its money back, it was not the incredible financial success that Lucas and MGM were hoping for. At the time, a lot of critics were very hard on this movie for not being as innovative or emotionally resonant as Star Wars. Even legendary film critics Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert both gave this movie a thumbs down.
Unfortunately, Willow may have the same effects, but it doesn't have the same magic. It's an uninspired and overlong adventure movie in which a baby is dragged from one end of the known world to the other and never stops smiling, except for little moments when it kind of looks like it's a little worried or it frowns a little bit.
Watch this film, you're seeing there's no clear vision, there's no breaking of any new ground. I wasn't surprised by anything in the film,
I
and I found it tedious. And I'm actually finding the whole genre a little bit tedious because if George Lucas and Ron Howard made Cocoon, if they can't come up with anything fresh in this genre, I think it's wiped out.
Whoa, what?
And while I would agree that Willow isn't as good as the original Star Wars, I don't think it is entirely fair to compare the two. This is a movie that I would argue has much more in common with The Princess Bride than it does with Star Wars. It is intentionally very goofy, very tongue-in-cheek, and pokes fun at a lot of typical tropes in fantasy. It may not be as visually stunning or emotionally compelling as Star Wars, But I still think the visuals are on par with most films from that era, and the characters are still a lot of fun. For me, Val Kilmer as Mad Mardigan is the highlight of this entire movie, as he gives maybe what is his most out there performance of his entire career. He's basically Aragorn if he were a bumbling, womanizing dork, and I absolutely love it. And Warwick Davis is a solid lead character who is a great emotional heart to the movie. It may not have the most original story or world building, but it still works well as a standalone fantasy adventure film. I emphasize standalone because Disney made a Willow TV show that was so bad that they just Thanos'd it out of existence, so there is no way to watch it legally. Which is honestly pretty unsettling, the idea that a single corporation could just wipe a piece of media from existence. While it may not have been the franchise starter that Lucas wanted it to be, or that Disney wanted it to be, Willow is still a fun, lighthearted fantasy movie that I have a huge soft spot for.
Don't ask questions. Just consume product and then get excited for next product.
Coming in at number 7, also with a 53% critic score, is going to be Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest from 2006. The Pirates movies have a very weird reputation, to say the least, which is something I plan on covering in a later video. From what I've seen online, most people seem to agree that the first one is good, they're pretty mixed on 2 and 3, and then most people seem to forget that a 4th and 5th film even exist. I, like a lot of people, had written off all of the sequels as being bad, but having rewatched these movies recently, I have to say that both Dead Man's Chest and At World's End held up a lot better than I remembered. And of the Pirates sequels, I have to give the edge to Dead Man's Chest. A big reason being because At World's End is just way too long. Why does a Pirates movie have almost the same runtime as The Godfather? But with Dead Man's Chest, when evaluated on its own, is actually a pretty solid sequel, all things considered. The stakes are appropriately raised from the first movie, and the overall scale of the action is much larger than the first movie. The action scenes with the Kraken in particular are very entertaining, and the mix of practical and digital effects still holds up very well. All of the actors are clearly giving it their all, and you can't help but smile at how much fun everyone is having.
Look what I got. I got a jar of dirt, I got a jar of dirt, and guess what's inside it?
But what really steals the show in this movie is Davy Jones, who is easily the best villain of the entire Pirates saga. Between Bill Nighy's quirky performance and the amazing motion capture effects, this character has a screen presence that is just mesmerizing to watch. On top of that, basically everything that happens on The Flying Dutchman is the best stuff in the whole movie. Will's relationship with his dad, the dice game, the summoning of the Kraken, all of that stuff is just so much fun. It also really helps that Dead Man's Chest has what I consider to be the best score out of all the Pirates movies. Once again, Hans Zimmer crushes it with the standout tracks being Jack Sparrow's theme, Kraken's theme, and of course, Davy Jones's theme. And while this movie has many positives, where Dead Man's Chest falls short is in its storytelling, because it is a lot more complicated than the first movie, with 4 main characters that each have their own motivations. Jack Sparrow wants the heart of Davy Jones to bargain for his freedom. Will Turner wants the heart to free his father from the Flying Dutchman. James Norrington wants the heart to give to Cutler Beckett, who in turn wants to use the heart to leverage Davy Jones into being a puppet of the East India Trading Company. And then Elizabeth is here to chase after Will Turner because Beckett ruined their wedding, and then she's flirting with Jack Sparrow also, but I guess that was a ploy the whole time. So, yeah, things got a lot more complicated. In and of themselves, none of these plot lines are bad, and do feel in line with the characters as they were established in the first movie, but it's just a lot to try to cram into a single film. So even though it isn't as tightly paced and well written as the first movie, I do think that Dead Man's Chest is a pretty solid follow-up in its own right that brings back most of what people loved from the first film.
All I'm saying. Let me ask you about pirates, though. You compared pirates to the to the depositions given in this case.
Then I apologize for what I said. Then I misspoke.
Because you know you can't compare pirates to sworn testimony, right?
Yes.
Coming in at number 9 with a 51% critic score is going to be Tron Legacy from 2010. To be honest, the original Tron from 1982 is a movie that I would say I more appreciate than enjoy. Make no mistake, the effects were very innovative for the era, and the world building and concepts are very creative. But the pacing isn't great, and I do have a hard time getting emotionally invested in the story of the original film. But with Tron Legacy, it took everything that worked about the original and just cranked it up to 11. It borrows a lot of the same concepts from the original, but enhances them with modern aesthetics and kinetic action. The disc battles and light cycle battles in this movie feel in line with what the 1982 film was attempting to capture, and it looks amazing. And in the same way that the effects of the original were cutting edge for 1982, the effects of Legacy were cutting edge for 2010. With the notable exception of CGI Jeff Bridges, every other effect in this movie holds up very well. And while the CGI for Clue hasn't aged the best, Jeff Bridges still does a fantastic job of making both of these characters feel distinct from one another. The thing from this movie that seems to have endured the most in pop culture is the aesthetic. The dark neon cyberpunk look is instantly recognizable as being uniquely from Tron, and it manages to be distinct from a lot of other sci-fi worlds in terms of its look. And then, of course, the soundtrack by Daft Punk may be one of the best modern film scores. It mixes orchestral and electronic music in a way that I really wish more film scores would do. And in terms of the story, Tron Legacy stands as an interesting example of a legacy sequel that existed before The Force Awakens turned that into a trend. The story of Sam and his father provides an emotional center to this movie that was severely lacking in the original film. So while it may not be as fondly remembered as other blockbusters from this era of film, Tron Legacy is a movie that I think holds up very well and expands upon a world that I can't help but be fascinated by. Here's hoping Disney doesn't ruin the sequel.
No. Wait. Wait.
Coming in at number 5 with a 50% critic score is going to be The Chronicles of Narnia: The Voyage of the Dawn Treader from 2010. Admittedly, this pick is very personal for me, as The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is my favorite of the Narnia books, and one of my favorite fantasy books of all time. This is the book that I would point to as the one that most inspired me to start writing when I was a teenager. Because of that very personal connection, even an okay adaptation of that book is one that I am going to enjoy even if it does get some things wrong. A lot of people don't like this movie because it does have a fair amount of differences from the book. However, to be fair, The problem with trying to adapt Dawn Treader into a blockbuster film is that the book is very episodic in the way it is written, and doesn't have an overarching antagonistic force that drives the plot forward. As such, the plot line surrounding the evil fog is the weakest stuff in the movie, but I also understand why they needed to add in an overarching villain of some kind. The production value is also noticeably cheaper looking in this movie than in the first two Narnia movies. This is because Dawn Treader is the only Narnia film that Disney did not have a hand in producing. But all that being said, the reason I like this movie so much is that the stuff it gets right from the book, it gets very right. I like seeing Edmund and Lucy getting to take center stage as the main characters, and Edmund's character progression across all three films feels the most coherent and compelling. I also love seeing Reepicheep on the big screen, and I think that Simon Pegg's voice and performance are perfect for this character.
Trying to run away? We're on a boat, you know.
Look, can't we just discuss this?
That was for stealing, that was for lying, and that was for good measure.
But funnily enough, the standout for me in this movie is Will Poulter as Eustace Scrubb. He perfectly captures how intentionally annoying the character is, while still having enough humanity and charm to make you still root for him. And while a lot of the surrounding details of the book were changed in the movie, Eustace's character arc remains the heart of the story and is very faithful to the source material. And it's unfortunate that they stopped making Narnia movies after this one because I would have loved to have seen Will Poulter return as Eustace in an adaptation of The Silver Chair. And even with all the changes from the book, I do think that this movie does a great job of maintaining the swashbuckling high seas adventure tone from the book. So even though it is probably the weakest of the Narnia films, it is still a movie that I enjoy because it successfully adapts a story that is very near and dear to my heart.
In your world, I have another name.
Or cheap parlor tricks to conceal your true identity, Ross.
Coming in with a 49% critic score is going to be Atlantis: The Lost Empire from the year 2000. Atlantis is a very unique movie, especially when compared to the rest of Disney animation. It came out in a period of time when computer-generated animation was a very new technology. As such, a lot of the movies in the early 2000s experimented with mixing 2D and 3D animation, and personally, I really gravitate towards this style. It's a really cool time capsule that shows how animation developed at the turn of the century. I would also say that the animation holds up pretty well under modern scrutiny, and this is due in large part to the strength of the art direction. The characters are drawn in a very comic book style, with a lot harsher lines and more exaggerated features than you typically see in a Disney movie. The character design for this movie was developed from the work of Mike Mignola, who is most famous for creating the Hellboy comics. And the influence is immediately recognizable when you look at the two side by side. And the look of Atlantis itself is very unique, mixing elements of both fantasy and sci-fi, as well as combining inspirations from both Mayan and Southeast Asian cultures. As for the story, Atlantis takes a lot of inspiration from Raiders of the Lost Ark, as well as classic Jules Verne stories like Journey to the Center of the Earth and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. As someone who grew up reading Jules Verne novels and watching the movie adaptations, it is really cool to watch an adventure movie that pays homage to these classics. The characters are also all immediately recognizable and endearing due to their various quirks and diverse backstories. And this is also due in large part to the witty dialogue and great banter.
We've done a lot of things we're not proud of. Robbing graves, plundering the tombs, double parking. But nobody got hurt. Well, maybe somebody got hurt, but nobody we knew.
So while Atlantis strays far from the tropes and traditions of a lot of classic Disney animated movies, to me it is still a great adventure film that I think is severely underrated.
Mike, you look at the size of this. It's got to be half a mile high at least. It must have taken hundreds, thousands of years to carve this thing.
Hey, look, I made a bridge. It only took me like, what, 10 seconds? 11 tops.
Coming in at number 3 with a 47% critic score is going to be the original Mortal Kombat movie from 1995. Mortal Kombat is a movie that you can level a lot of legitimate criticisms towards. The acting is often stilted and awkward.
What's that sound?
The source of all Shang Tsung's power. The souls of 1,000 dead warriors.
The effects have not aged well, and the story is about as bare bones simple as it gets. And I would agree with you on all of these criticisms. Yet, I still have an absolute blast with this movie every time I watch it. This is because, in my eyes, Mortal Kombat is a movie that is honest with itself about what it is. Rather than try to take the video game and make a super serious dramatic story, Mortal Kombat embraces the inherently goofy and campy nature of the game. And I think this self-awareness is shown in a lot of the performances. Terry Hiroyuki Tagawa chews the scenery and absolutely steals the show every time he is on screen.
Your brother's soul is mine. You fool! I can see into your soul. You will die.
Lyndon Ashby as Johnny Cage walks that thin line between being cool and lame with all of his hilariously cheesy quips.
This is where you fall down.
And Christopher Lambert's performance as Raiden is so weird, but I love it all the same.
The fate of billions will depend upon you. Sorry.
Everybody seems to know that they are in a goofy martial arts movie and are just having fun with it. As goofy as it is, the choreography of a lot of the fight scenes is legitimately impressive. In particular, the Johnny Cage vs. Scorpion fight is very cool to watch. And all of this, of course, is elevated by a theme song and soundtrack that is instantly iconic. Overall, Mortal Kombat is a very goofy movie, but it is the kind of 90s cheese that I absolutely love.
I don't think so.
Our runner-up with a 36% critic score is going to be Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time from 2010. With Prince of Persia, bear in mind that I am speaking as someone who has not played any of the video games, so I can't fairly judge this movie as an adaptation of the games. But, judging this movie as a standalone fantasy adventure movie, I think that it is pretty fun. What really elevates this movie for me is the central plotline surrounding the Sands of Time. Time travel and time manipulation is used in some pretty creative ways in this movie. The use of the Sands of Time makes for some pretty creative action scenes and a surprisingly poignant ending. And while Jake Gyllenhaal is perhaps the least Persian-looking man in all of existence, he does a good job as the lead, and his banter with the Princess Tamina helps give the movie a strong heart. And on top of that, we have Alfred Molina as the comic relief, who helps give this movie some much-needed levity.
You know your brother's offered a reward for you, which quite frankly, between you and me, borders on the obscene. I'd trade in my own mother for that kind of gold. What? You didn't know what she was like.
The only thing that holds this movie back from being great is the way it handles exposition. The pacing of the movie will suddenly come to a halt at different points in the narrative to dole out a lot of backstory, and this would have been much more digestible if it had been given to us in doses. As such, the movie spends much more time on exposition instead of characterization, which does weaken the emotional investment of the main narrative. But again, what saves this movie is the ending, which I won't spoil here, but I think it is a fantastic ending to a movie involving time travel. In spite of the bad exposition dumps and clunky pacing, Prince of Persia to me is a movie that manages to be a fantasy movie with creative action scenes, fun character interactions, and an ending that is genuinely unexpected in the best possible way.
I crafted our lurid reputation in order to fend off the most insidious evil that's been lurking this forsaken country of ours. You know what I'm talking about? Taxes.
Finally, my number one rotten sci-fi movie that I enjoy with an abysmal 28% critic score is RoboCop 2 from 1990. Of all the movies on this list, this is the movie that confuses me the most as to why the critic score is so low. Because all things considered, I think this is a pretty good follow-up to the first RoboCop from 1987. While RoboCop 2 was not directed by the original director, Paul Verhoeven, Irving Kershner did a great job continuing the spirit of the first film in the sequel. The combination of over-the-top violence with a morbid sense of humor is still present.
And don't try to follow me!
We won't.
The baby's going with me!
No.
I'll kill it, man! I'll do it! I'll kill it!
We can't have that.
The satire of American commercialism and corporate overreach is still there.
Magnavolt, the final word in auto security. No embarrassing alarm noise, no need to trouble the police. And it won't even run down your battery.
And the action is still very gritty and entertaining. Peter Weller and Nancy Allen are both great in their returning roles as RoboCop and Officer Lewis, respectively. For Peter Weller in particular, this movie gave him a lot of moments to really show off his range as an actor. And overall, I actually think RoboCop 2 might be a funnier movie than the first film. The standout moments being the RoboFlops sequence, and RoboCop's various malfunctions.
He's dead, Murphy.
You have the right to an attorney.
You're reading Miranda to a corpse.
I'm having trouble.
Also, this movie has a cameo by Frank Miller. Yes, that Frank Miller. The biggest thing that holds RoboCop 2 back from being as good as the first film is its structure. There are a lot more plot threads at play in this movie than in the first one, and they don't all come together quite as coherently as the first movie. So while RoboCop 2 may not be as tightly written or thematically poignant as its predecessor, to me it is still a worthy sequel that carries on the spirit of the first film in a way that is thoroughly entertaining.
This could look bad for OCP, Johnson. Scramble the best spin team we have.
So those are the top 10 rotten sci-fi and fantasy films that I enjoy. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and let me know your own thoughts on these movies down in the comments, as well as any movies you love that critics didn't like. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.